Have you ever listened to a piece of music and suddenly realized there is something else going on, sort of in the background, while the main melody is playing? It might even be a little bit hard to catch on to, but it adds this sort of wow, magic to the music. Today, I want to give you 3 practical tips on how to write great counter melodies that will elevate your next piece of music. Hello everyone, my name is Noam. Before we dive in, for those not familiar with the term, a counter melody is basically a second melody going simultaneously with the main melody. This does have to do with counterpoint, but I'm not going to deal with any strict rule kind of counterpoint. Rather, we're going to talk about a more free kind of counter melodies that, as I said before, elevate the music to another level. So basically our goal when writing a counter melody is to add another melody that enriches the listener's experience without detracting from the main melody and without distracting. So how do we do this? Well, one of the main things has to do with contrast. And that brings me to tip number 1. Use contrasting rhythms. Let's listen to this example by Johann Sebastian Bach. We all know this piece of music. The orchestration here has violins 1 section, a violins 2 section, a viola, and a cello or bass part. Let's check out the violin 1 and violin 2 parts. So I've got the violin 1 in this light blue color and the violin 2 is orange. Even visually looking at this, we can see something very interesting. When the violin 1, which I consider the main melody, has a long sustained note, the violin 2 has a lot more movement. Let's listen to this part. So we got the violin 1 holding a note and the violin 2 has a melody. Da 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 da. And then the violin 1 goes back to have more movement and violin 2 has silence. And once again, violin 1, a long sustained note, and violin 2 plays a melody. Let's listen to this. This is what I mean by rhythmic contrast. When one melody is moving, the other melody is more static or has a rest. This is in classical music, but it applies to any genre of music. I actually recall a pop song from the 90s which used this classical piece of music as its backbone and added a beat over it. Some of you may find this familiar. Everything's gonna be alright. Everything's gonna be okay. Everything's gonna be alright. That could be considered a second counter melody. The everything's gonna be very easily discernible from the other melodies because it contrasts in rhythm. Now you may ask yourself, okay, what do I do if my main melody is moving all the time? Well, that's easy. You can just have a counter melody that is in a slower motion, or vice versa. You might have a slow main melody, and then your counter melody could be a fast melody giving a lot of movement in the background. On to tip number 2. This tip has to do with tonal contrast. That means contrast in range, high versus low, and contrast in instrumentation, using instruments with different timbres to give contrast. Here I've got a little example to demonstrate tonal contrast. Let's listen to it. So we've got this cinematic, kind of epic piece of music, and we have a melody very clearly carried by the brass. Let's listen to the melody on its own for a second. I've added a counter melody that is both in a different instrument, very different timbre, and in a different range. The instrument I picked is the celesta. Let's listen to it on its own for a second. And together with a melody. Because of the tonal contrast, it is very easy to hear the main melody and the counter melody at the same time. I'll solo it for a second so you can just hear the celesta, and then I'll play everything together, and you can try to listen and see if you can hear it. Now I've added a second counter melody option here with a choir. Check it out. Together with the main melody. We have here both the rhythmic contrast that we talked about before. The choir has movement where the brass is in more sustained notes and vice versa. And we also have a contrast in timbre that helps us differentiate between the parts and make this combination more digestible. Let's hear it in the context of the whole mix, and I'll add in the celesta as well. I'd argue that these counter melodies add a lot, but I'll let you check this out for yourself. I'll play just the beginning with and without the counter melodies, and we can hear the difference. So I'd argue that the counter melodies add a lot of richness and fullness to the music. Yeah, basically elevate it to another level. On to the third tip, which is basically make it musical. What do I mean by make it musical? Well, it's mainly two things. One, make the melody singable, catchy, simple. A large part of our goal here is to keep the clarity of the main melody, have the counter melody as a secondary supportive role here. We don't want it to be distracting, and a disjointed melody could be distracting. Same goes with weird kind of rhythms, very syncopated or whatever. Keep it simple, catchy, like with any melody. The second part of making it musical is keeping it within the harmony of your music. As you may have noticed, I use a chord track, which you can see up here, or if I close this, here I'm using a chord track, which helps me keep track, pun intended, of what the harmony is at any given moment. As a basic rule of thumb, you usually want to land on a downbeat on the beginning of a bar on one of the notes in the chord, but I'm not going to get into that here in this video. So to summarize, a great counter melody leaves room for the main melody and supports it. We can achieve that by using contrast in rhythm, contrast in timbre and in range, and by keeping it simple, melodic, and in the harmony. Now, there are obviously times when you are not interested in adding a counter melody. Sometimes you just want to put your melody out there and that's it. No need for a counter melody. On the other hand, sometimes you don't even want the main melody to be that clear. In classical music, you got fugues where you have the melody moving in between different voices and going a lot of melodies going on at the same time. And that's actually pretty cool. You can listen to it over and over, and each time try to pinpoint one of the melodies and see if you can hear each one of them. It all depends on your goal and what you're trying to do with this piece of music. For instance, in this piece of music, if I were to use it for maybe to be under dialogue or something, or maybe for a trailer, or I don't know, something like that, I might actually cut out some of the parts because it does feel a little bit too dense for that kind of use, especially with all of the added counter melodies. What do you think? Do you have any of your tips on how to make a great counter melody? Do you have any questions or comments on something that I said in this video? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We can all learn from each other. Put them in the comments section. I read every single one. That's it for today. If you liked the video, if you learned something, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, smash that bell so you can get notified when I upload a new video. That is also a great free way to support me and help the channel grow and reach more people. Until next time, goodbye.